My day job is helping authors write books, own their message, get that message out into the world. And I love what I do. There's definitely a creative aspect to it, a coaching aspect to it. And it's just really fun to see a project go from its infancy, sometimes just like an idea scrawled on a napkin, to something that, thousands of people benefit from. So it's a great privilege to do what I do. And then I also coach writers on my own through something called the Writer's Circle. And that's just because I've learned as an editor, writing is daunting, but so is publishing. It's confusing. And so I try to demystify it for up and coming writers who aren't sure where to start. And so, yeah, I enjoy doing both kind of my editing full time with authors who have figured out the platform thing, most of them, but then also helping to coach those who want to grow and want to find a way to get their words into the world.
Amazing. I love it. What are some challenges that Christian authors face that you see often, and how do we overcome them?
Yeah, great question. Um, I'd say the first challenge isn't particular to Christian writers, but I think all writers have imposter syndrome, and we all have a fear of putting our words out publicly and how people will respond. And it is scary. Um, I've had people criticize my writing, mock my writing. Um, they're the minority, but it still hurts. And so I think a lot of writers wonder, am I good enough? They wonder, am I smart enough? They wonder, do I really have something to say? Will anyone care? And so just time and time again, I see that fear creeping up. And so as Christians, I do think we have the privilege and benefit of knowing that, yes, we can always learn, we can grow, we're going to make mistakes, but that God's Spirit will also give us wisdom in what to write, and that it's okay if we fail sometimes, that our worth, our value is not tied just to our output, the response of our audience. And so there's a piece there. And while we strive for excellence and we hope that our words make an impact, at the end of the day, if it's not what we expected or we're disappointed, we have the resources to kind of deal with that, which is a gift. So that's one thing I'd say. Um, I'd also say, yeah, Christian publishing is a small world. It's like you can get to know sort of the major players over, a couple months, a year. You start to figure out, okay, here are the publishers, the agents, whoever. And so I think it can feel hard for Christian writers to know how to break into that industry. And publishing, like many industries, is partially about who you know and the warm connections that you have, and trying not to be that desperate writer who's cold emailing saying, please read my manuscript. That's and I empathize with those writers. I've been that writer, and so I know how deflating it is to be ignored or to get a rejection. But it's like there's a paradox there, because though the Christian market is somewhat small in terms of the larger, publishing landscape, it can feel like a really hard nut to crack. And like there's a lot of people who are trying to break in alongside you. There's a lot of competition, honestly. And so I think that can be a little disorienting for a lot of writers. So those are a few things that come to mind.
How do you break in?
Oh, there's no silver bullet. We
Yeah.
could we could leave it there. Yeah, how do you break in? That is the question that I get asked. And if this is helpful for those who have not heard it, there is an analogy that we use inside the industry, that publishing and what publishers are looking for is like this three-legged table, and you need all of them as an author for your idea to stand and gain traction. So the first leg of the table is your platform, and that's the dreaded word. We can talk more about that if you want, but um, publishers are looking to see that you have garnered interest, not just in you and your quote unquote brand, because I think that language rubs a lot of us the wrong way, but that you've sort of carved out an area of expertise that people are coming to you for. And your social media numbers may not be through the roof, but people definitely want to know what you think about homeschooling your kids or building a kingdom-minded business or fill in the blank. And so sometimes we get proposals and it'll be like a health and fitness person who suddenly decides they're going to write about the stock market. And like, will anyone come to you for that? I don't know. And so, yeah, looking for not just numbers, because that's what we all dread. Man, I don't have enough followers, enough subscribers. It's not just that, it's also engagement. Like, are people really engaging with you? Have you built a community? So that's the first leg of the table. The second is your concept, your book idea. Is it fresh? Is there a new angle? I think as a note of encouragement, writers can just free themselves from that pressure to come up with a totally novel concept that no one's ever written about before. Um, I don't think that's actually possible. I think everything's been written on before. There's nothing new under the sun, and that's okay. But what you can bring is your own story, your unique lens, and sometimes just saying old things in new ways, having a fresh angle is all it takes. So that's the second, is a compelling concept. And then the third is maybe the most predictable, but it's your content. In other words, your writing ability. So does your writing sing? Um, Not every writer has poetic prose, some are very straightforward, but okay, is it clear? Is it well organized? That kind of a thing. So those are the three: platform, your concept, and your content.
Cool.
So if you nail those three, yeah, you're off to the races. Or at least if two out of the three are really strong, that's great. And so you can use that paradigm as almost a diagnostic. Like, where do I need to grow the most? Is it my actual writing? Do I need to sharpen this idea that I have and run it by some people? Do I need to invest time strategizing about how to grow my following? And I think that can actually help writers take their next step and know where to channel their energy.
Mm-hmm. Got it. What are some key elements of a book that make it impactful?
Mm, yeah, great question. A lot of people will ask, what makes a bestseller? Or they'll even market their resources that way. And I find that slightly disingenuous for people to promise, hey, we have a formula for a bestseller. A lot of bestsellers are catch the industry by surprise. And it's like no one thought it was going to go as far as it did. But a couple of things I would say: bestsellers tend to have a really strong felt need, that a lot of people, it's right there on the surface for them in that moment, um, kind of a flash in the pan moment. And so I was at a conference this past week, and one of the speakers was talking about how he grew his music career. And he just said, my philosophy for everything I put out is put others first. Um, think of them. And then he quoted Philippians 2, don't count your own interests above the interests of others, but basically with humility, as Christ did, serve others in. That's a great lens through which to filter all of your content. Like, is this trying to help other people? And that may sound cliche, but actually I catch myself all the time writing from a perspective of, I just want to share this, rather than asking, do people need this? Will my audience be served by this? And like I said, I do a lot of writing coaching. And so I'll even have people write out the problem or the felt need of their book. And they maybe get like 30% of the way. And they think, oh yeah, I've covered the felt need. But just think about the type of books that if it's nonfiction, like the type of books you read. It's the ones that you look at the cover or the back copy, or you thumb through it and you immediately say, ah, I need this. Like I want to know more about this because I have some tension or problem in my life that I think this book can address. And so that's probably the biggest one. And the flip side is the biggest mistake that I see writers make is, and I want to be careful with this because there's a ton of value in writing this way, but still, I'd say the greatest mistake they make is everyone wants to write a memoir, even if they don't call it that. They just want to share their story because it's so meaningful to them. And I actually think sharing your story as a writer is super important. The question is it the main thing you spotlight? It can be. And memoirs are a very powerful genre of nonfiction. But what if your story would serve your audience better if you were drip feeding it in rather than making it the main event? And that's really tough for a lot of writers to turn that corner because for them, writing is very cathartic.
Yeah.
It's them just sort of brain dumping, their life onto the page, which again, I don't want to diminish or criticize that. It's a beautiful thing to share your story on the page. But the moment you shift from writing just for you to wanting to write, market, publish a book, the stakes just go up so much. The competition multiplies. And so, your question, Rachel, was how do you break through? I really would point back to make it about them. And there's a term that I've come up with called literary hospitality. And the idea is that your book is like your home. And just think about all the things you would do when you have dinner guests over and they walk in the door. Maybe you take their coat, you offer them something to drink. At the meal, you're asking them questions. Hopefully, you're listening to what they're saying, like genuinely listening. And those are some of the soft skills, I think, that if you bake into your writing, especially a nonfiction book, that they can just go so far. And readers don't feel like you're just talking on and on about yourself, but they feel seen, they feel valued, they feel helped. You're prompting them to sort of reflect about their own lives or about who God is or about the season they're in. And that's a great gift that you can give. Um, so that would be one thing. I spent a lot of time on that, but it's super important and I see it neglected. Maybe one other tip. So if you're looking to set yourself apart as a writer, I think adopting this philosophy or this practice, get feedback early and often. Get feedback early and often. Our tendency for many of us, myself included, is to write and then to wait until it's quote unquote perfect to show it to someone else. And so one thing about being an editor is everyone who finds out, they'll tell you, oh, I want to write a book. And here's what my book is. So I was walking to my neighborhood and a neighbor stopped me and he said, yeah, my wife's been working on this book for years and I'd love for you to get to look at it. And I said, okay, tell me more about the book. And he said, well, I've never seen it. I was like, really? You've never seen your wife's book? He's like, yeah, she won't let me see it until it's done. And I asked him, and it's been years that she's been working on this. And he said, yep. I was like, wow. And so that's a great, an extreme example, but we feel like we have to get it right before we share it. And I say, no, practice in public. Get your writing in, even if it's your mom, your grandpa, your closest friends, whoever, but just that discipline and practice of getting your writing in front of others and then asking them for feedback is super shaping. And by the way, one of my favorite aspects of being an editor is being welcomed in, because it's a privilege, but being welcomed into those early stages of writing and really helping to shape not just what the book's about, but how the journey will go and sort of the trajectory that the author's going to take the readers on. So anyways, those are two things I'd say.
Okay. I want to go back to the first thing that you were talking about, like sharing your story in the memoir and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Do you think there could be like a formula that you could use like for the chapters, do you ever recommend a formula where, like, for instance, it could be like share a little bit of your story, but then make it about them kind of thing and like tie in a lesson? What does that work?
Absolutely. And to me, so you're asking about like a writing template,
Yeah.
and I do think templates can be helpful in certain circumstances. One would be when you're writing and publishing very regularly. So, for example, if you're doing a newsletter or a column or something like that, it can be very helpful to kind of have a practice. And with my own newsletter, I I follow it less and less, but for a good year, I literally followed almost verbatim the same template each week, and I stole it from someone else. But yeah, in terms of chapter structure, one that I think works well, it's very, very basic. But you start with something personal, so that's your intro. And in the age of I just keep hearing people who are much smarter than I am about AI just say the writing that's going to survive the age of AI is writing that is very personal and very opinionated and very tied to your experience, because AI cannot know um, what you know and what you've experienced. It can crunch data, it can summarize, but it can't know those things. And so, anyways, yeah, starting with something personal and then expanding it to the universal. So, moving from here is my experience to, hey, we all experience that. And you probably feel that, or you have this question or this problem. So personal, universal, and then the third step at the end is to actually bring it full circle back to the personal, or the us. And so giving people like a principle to take away, or a question to ask. And so yeah, I think that works really well. It's just that personal, universal, personal. um, I think that balances well, talking about yourself while also including the reader.
Cool. How can writing a book help entrepreneurs build their businesses?
Oh man, yeah, I mean, I see it more and more. The first thing I would say is actually it may not be the way to grow your business, depending on how you're wired. And so, um, call me a purist, but any business owner who just sees a book as a lead magnet, um, I would just want them to have the full picture. Like, hey, this is going to be a ton of work, right? Marketing this book is basically going to be a part-time job. Writing the book, you're going to be pulling your hair out. Like it sounds really attractive and cool on the front end, but there are much faster ways, I think, to build your business than writing a book. So that's my caveat. But if you're wired and you love words, you love communication, it would actually bring you some measure of joy to labor over a book and to market it. And you already have maybe the tools, the systems, or the team to market a book, then I'd say, yeah, go for it. Be awesome. And I've seen it help so many people. There's one guy, Jordan Rayner. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
We had him on the show and we're going to have him on again in a few weeks.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I love Jordan, and have worked a little bit with him. And I mean, his books are great on their own. Lots of great content. He writes about faith and work. But yeah, in his books, I mean, he points people to his website. He encourages them once they're there to take his courses, to join his community. And I would say, I mean, ask him for the stats because he's a total numbers person, but probably 90% of the people in his community are readers of his books. And so books, I've heard it said, are a way to multiply yourself and to give people 5 hours with you without actually being with them, which is powerful. And so you're building trust with them, you're showing your expertise. Back to the literary hospitality thing, you're showing them that you care as much as you can through a book, and all of that just sort of accrues credibility. And so, yeah, people are much more likely to want to do business with you buy your product or service if they have had a chance to get to know you. And so writing a really good book, and I'll say that again, writing a really good book
Yeah.
is a great way to drum up business and to establish your brand. You see a lot of stuff out there, like with one click, AI will write your business marketing book, or in 30 days, this 30-day challenge, you will write a client garnering resource, and that's fine, but that's a lead magnet. That ain't a book. And so there's a big difference. And if you're going to do something like that, aim for a short read, something that's punchy, that, call it whatever you want, an ebook, a lead magnet, a resource. But yeah, books are their own animal. And I would say less business owners probably are ready to dive into that process fully. So,
What encouragement do you have to say to a first-time writer?
like a first-time writer who's just starting out or looking to get published.
Yeah, they're like they have the idea, they have the dream, but they haven't like actually taken the steps yet.
Yeah, yeah. Um, a couple things. I'd say number one, hold these two things in tension. Um, God may be calling you to write, and you may feel that He's given you this message, and perhaps He has. So that's one truth, sort of the spiritual motivation, that God has given you a message. That's a beautiful thing. But hold that intention with the idea that it's going to be a lot of work. And sometimes we can over spiritualize the writing process. I do work with a lot of Christian writers, and so the common lingo is God told me to write this book. God wants me to write this book. I'm called to write this book. And I just hear it over and over and over. And 95% of those people don't land book deals. What does that tell us? Does that tell us that God didn't put it on their heart to write? I don't think so. I think what it tells us is publishing is really tricky and it's daunting. And if you are writing and if you are faithful enough to write the message God has given you, good on you for your obedience. But know that you don't need a book deal. You don't need tons of followers. You don't need to hit a bestseller list for those words to have an impact. And that's not what people want to hear. I understand that. But in fact, I just posted something like this and some of the comments were like, that's cool, but can God give me the book deal anyway? And hey, that's honest. But yeah, I would just say you really have to hold those things in tension. I think of in Philippians where it talks about, working out your salvation. It's us being proactive, us going after it, us toiling. But then the very next verse, which is beautiful, talks about how it is God who works in us and actually gives us the power. So what I'm not saying is go just grind it out and accomplish it on your own and prove God right. No, lean on Him right from a place of dependence, but also knowing that it's going to require a lot of you and you're going to have to pour yourself out. And those two things are not in tension. A lot of books don't happen because people just play the God card and they say, God wants me to write this, but those evil publishers, they won't have it. And that's why this isn't working out. Rather than understanding that none of us are promised that level of success. Not every writer gets a book deal, but what if your words can still bless your family, your friends, your church community, your colleagues? How can you get that book out? What would that look like? I think I want to inspire people that way. And then one other thing I would want to encourage writers with is don't do it alone. I think that's very tied to the first maybe blind spot I've mentioned, where people start to over spiritualize it. It's because it's just them and their laptop, and they feel this urgency and this calling to write. But just like God doesn't call us to know Him alone, but He calls us to live in community and both for encouragement, accountability, and growth. and being sharpened and discipleship. Writing is no different. And so, yes, if God has called you to write, then you can bet that he's also called you to find others who can strengthen your writing, who can make you better, who can cheer you on through some of the valleys and the plateaus. And so, refuse to do it alone. Refuse to be my neighbor who holds it so tightly and so quote unquote sacredly that she has cut out even her own spouse. Like that's just crazy to me. You don't have to share with your spouse if that feels vulnerable, but certainly share with someone and get your words out there. It's so important. I can't overemphasize just how much writers grow when they are willing to risk and do that and to get feedback. So don't do it alone.
Beautiful. Where can we connect with you?
Yeah, the main place that I would point people is just writerscircle.co. And there they can sign up for my newsletter. And my whole heartbeat behind the newsletter is for writers who feel stuck, who feel frustrated and unseen, who don't know what their next step is. And I try to produce resources for them that are extremely practical, things that help them find a literary agent, know how to structure their writing, like we were talking about, know how to approach publishers or strengthen the concept. So it's just all of these things on repeat. And yeah, that would be the main place to go.
Cool. We'll put that in the description of this episode. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Will. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel.